Hello again, Donna. Thank you so much for offering to have a little chat with us again. Last time you gave us an insight into what you've been speaking about at the conference in October. And this time I thought it would be nice to ask you how you feel your own health has impacted on what you write.
Absolutely. So I should start by saying that we are a family, my family of origin, that had a lot of medical issues. So my origin story isn't just my own. It started when I was very young and I was 12, and my father had a routine medical surgery. He had had a lot of chronic pain. He had a rheumatological disorder, and he went in for a general surgery, gastrointestinal, and he died as a result of a medical error. So, you know, we look back many years later and we realize the things that influenced us. Right. At that time, and I actually have a piece coming out about this in the Washington Post this weekend.
Oh, brilliant.
At that time, you know, as a family, we knew that our dad post-op was in a lot of pain. The surgeon said pain after surgery is normal, and we watched him go into peritonitis shock and die. Yeah. So those stories stick with you when you're a 12-year-old girl and you love and adore your dad. And they came to me very clearly in that life experience that we needed to be asking the right questions as patients to get the outcomes that we deserved. Right. I don't think I thought about it for another 15 years until I was in my late 20s and suddenly found myself waking up, having fainted, having seizures for no known reason. Tried to ignore it for a while because good Episcopal family, you know, we don't talk about those things. We suffer from them, but we don't discuss them. So for a few years, really from college until the time I was 28, I was having a lot of what we now know are vagal syncope issues, right. Very common in young women and related to a lot of autoimmune disorders. But I just soldiered on and found myself living in New York, waking up literally on the street with people standing over me. One time I woke up in a movie theater and a doctor was standing over me saying, you know, you really have to seek attention and medical help. I had a seizure in front of my aunt, who was an RN, a registered nurse. Yeah. And she said, I'm taking you to the hospital. And that's how I got my first pacemaker at the age of 28. Wow. And even at that time, for me, the struggle to take my own medical issues seriously and in my own hands was such a great struggle. Then my son was born when I was 34, and he had a really serious medical problem. He almost died. The doctor that we took him to several times told me that I was hysteric, that he had colic, and sent me home. It took everything that I had to keep going back to that practice every morning and showing up. And bear in mind, here in the US, we don't do that. We don't have clinics, right? We have appointments. Okay. You make them, you wait, and you go. And if there's no appointment, you go to the ER. Yeah. I just got in my car with my baby strapped in his car seat and showed up at the same doctor's office every day. They had no appointments. It was a newborn. The doctor I joined the practice to see couldn't see us. And her partner just blew me off. One day, her partner was blowing me off the third day. My baby wasn't eating. He was screaming. I was being told he had colic. He would try to eat, scream, fall off the breast, turn beet red, cry for 20 minutes. Wow. And I knew something wasn't right. And another doctor, the one I joined the practice to see, walked out of an exam room and she said, I think I've seen you here every day. And I said, you have? And she said, let's look at your baby. Wow. Right. And so just to speed all this up a little bit, she then told me, I listened to my mom's, tell me what you're seeing. My son ended up having emergency surgery at Johns Hopkins, where my father had died.
Oh.
Gastrointestinal surgery in the same hospital.
Oh gosh.
And
that's traumatic.
A long series of events later, 2 years later, my son was doing really well.
Mm-hmm.
But I have learned through my own stories and those of my father and my son, and later my experiences having been paralyzed twice with Guillain-Barré syndrome,
wow.
that we are the keeper of our well-being.
Absolutely.
And in my writing, I began to realize that as a health and science journalist and a parenting journalist at that time, I came out with a parenting book in 2003 about multiracial families.
Oh, wow.
And I was lecturing a lot about parenting, and it suddenly came to me that a lot of my readers were women with chronic conditions like mine.
Right.
So I started to take this on as a mission.
Mm-hmm.
And as I began to write the autoimmune epidemic, I heard from literally thousands of women who were suffering with autoimmune conditions. And just to marry that to my earlier comments, just didn't feel they had any control, any insight. They didn't feel they had doctors who listened. They didn't listen to themselves.
Mm.
They were very disconnected from their pain and their illness and searching for answers. And I made the decision one day, I was in the hospital trying to write while very ill, and my agent came to see me because she's a good person. And she brought a stack. This is back in 2007.
Mm-hmm.
And I was hospitalized for the third time with ramifications of Guillain-Barré syndrome, for which I had been paralyzed for long periods of time.
Mm.
So bear in mind, during that time, I had to have live-in help for my children who were, 2 and 6.
Wow.
And then the second time I was paralyzed, they were 6 and 10. And then the third time I was in the hospital for a long time, they were 9 and 11. So I had spent more than 2 years in and out of the hospital before my children were 11.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'd missed a lot of their childhood.
Mm-hmm.
I'd missed having my father in my childhood. My son had almost missed having a childhood.
Yeah.
And the readers I was hearing from were missing out on having a life.
Yeah.
And my agent walked in my hospital room way before all of the emails and, paperless society, with a stack of letters about that high
Mm-hmm.
from readers talking about their pain, their illness, their inability to sort of navigate their own relationship to illness.
Yeah.
And the ways in which they might find healing outside of doctors who were blowing them off, the way that doctors had blown off my family.
Mm. So you really touched a nerve.
I think I touched a nerve within myself and my own heart, really.
Yeah. And isn't it easier to work when you have such a passion and a mission that you're working towards?
Absolutely. And there was never a time where it was, wow, here's a good market. I've never.
No. You can tell that from your writing.
I couldn't care less if there's a market or not. I know when people are suffering, because I too have suffered on a medical journey and on a healing journey. And so too has my son, and so too did my father and my family. So this is something that I think we can shed light on, and we can help by closing the gap between what is known and what people can do. I always bear in mind as one of my sort of mottos or mantras of writing is the words of the scientific philosopher Thomas Kuhn once said, it takes 20 years between what's happening in labs and research and the application for real patients in their doctor's offices. I'm paraphrasing, but that was his general discovery.
Yeah.
And so when I set out to do the autoimmune epidemic, at that time, there was very little understanding that there was an epidemic of autoimmune disease. I was just banging on doors at the National Institutes of Health, which is here in America, our largest funding institution for health. Really pounding the pavement, trying to get people to look at the literature and the research that I was doing. And I had put together a chart of rising rates of autoimmune disease, particularly in women, across 15 countries.
Wow.
Over 3 decades.
Yeah.
And I started to get a little attention.
Mm-hmm.
And so this sort of, citizen journalist, of course I write for major publications, so I had a little bit of ability to get into certain doors.
Yeah.
And my own grandfather had been one of the founders and director of cancer research at the National Institutes of Health, so that helped me a lot.
Yeah.
And I began to see here was a really big story about female suffering and female pain. And what was on the other side of it? Doctors blowing patients off.
Mm.
So women who suffered as I had suffered, and physicians not listening as physicians in my family had not listened.
Mm-hmm.
And what did I know? That could lead to really bad outcomes, like the outcome for my father. Yeah. I also knew that there were really great outcomes because I had some great physicians, and my son had finally had a great physician.
Absolutely.
So I guess the way that I'm going to say this is that I am informed by suffering on the part of patients, primarily female patients suffering.
Right.
Because women have been so historically undermined and invalidated by our medical system.
Mm-hmm.
Women have the majority of invisible illnesses, from autoimmune diseases to chronic pain to depression, psychiatric disorders. I've spent a lot of time researching this, and it has a lot to do with the way that we're built to carry babies and our hormones. Mm-hmm. These are things that women don't go equipped with in terms of information into their healing journey.
Right.
The science about what's happening in their bodies, the degree of validation that they deserve, mm-hmm. and what they need to know to have a different outcome.
And do you know the statistics off the top of your head of the men versus women who are suffering?
In autoimmune disease, it's about 9 to 1 in most disorders. Wow. And in depression, it's about 3 to 1.